Hey, it's Sam, and I'm here talking about the 10th house in Vedic Astrology. The 10th house, of course, comes after the 9th house, where the 9th house has to do with our teachings, philosophies, principles, higher wisdom, where we seek a teacher because we know we don't have the answers and we want to connect with the truth. The 10th house has to do with the impact we have on the world based on those values and those based on our values. It's an artha house, a house of what we would call wealth or value, and it's a very tricky house. It's often not, I often don't find that the real meat of the 10th house is described very well. It's usually career. It's really often career, at least we express it authentically in our career, but it's really the impact that we have. It's how our values impact the world in the highest sense. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not career. Like, think of all these years, all the centuries where women never worked. They had a 10th house though. And, you know, we can impact through raising children. We impact through affecting our community. And our values sometimes are not expressed satisfactorily in our career. And this is where we start to get a little out of alignment. The thing to understand is that we're striving. We would like our values to impact the world in the highest way. And what I mean is that the values from the 2nd house, which is also our money and our income, we would like those things that we value the most to impact the world the most in the 10th house. But our values are often not necessarily in sync with our identity at different periods. So what I mean to say is that needing to feed your family is a value that's going to supersede other more esoteric values like wanting to serve the world. Or often these are at odds. So for example, when someone is young and you have, let's say you're 25 years old and you have 2 kids, your highest value at that point is providing for your kids. You're going to try to make as much money and get as much security and money based on your earning power probably at that time, and you'll figure out, whether or not it's congruent with your principles later. As long as you're not, murdering people, you'll probably try to make as much money as you can and worry about your inner conflicts about how it's helping the world or not helping the world. You'll worry about that later. See, this is what winds up happening, how people later in life, they reach a point where their 10th house energy is now really confusing because their values started at a very young age because of usually things like family, like having a family, or let's say they were influenced by their family. So rather than checking in about what their highest values were, they went off and got an education based on what their family wanted. Indians, accountants, engineers, right? I'm sort of making a joke, but how often I talk to Indian families where they wonder why their kid doesn't want to go be an engineer or a programmer. And I'm like, well, those are your values. Maybe that's not their values. Indian families whose kids are more westernized, or even not, but especially ones that are westernized and they're kind of in between cultures, where Indian families, in India or whatever, they often say, okay, go be a programmer, an engineer, a doctor, an MBA, right? And often when we decide these things when we're 20 years old based on what our parents helped us decide or pressured us into doing, and based on when we were in high school, it's very easy that by the time we get to be 25 or 30, and we now have 2 kids, and we've been trained to be an MBA or an engineer or a programmer, and we hate it, that we're going to feel we're going to start to feel trapped. The reason is because, again, the 10th house is what we're trying to do is impact the world the most based on our values, what we value the most. And again, when we're younger, like if we do things such as start a family, or if we're still beholden to our birth family that paid for our education, or some other kind of thing where our values have not yet been claimed of our own will and of our own volition, we're going to get out of alignment, and our duties and responsibilities in the 10th house are going to will lack alignment with our core values and principles. And again, the more we do this, the more we get on that path, the more we even sort of program ourselves. We program ourselves to have a certain standard of living. Let's just use that example that I just said. Someone got married and had kids when they were 26, 27. They got about 15 to 20 years of having to make a lot of money to pay to support a family, a couple kids. So by the time they're at least by their mid-40s, they're going to just be trying to earn as much money as they can. Now, by this time, they're going to accumulate bills, all kinds of stuff. They're also going to accumulate an identity that revolves around these kinds of things. So let's then say that underneath it all, though, let's say they start studying astrology or whatever, and they imagine, yes, this is so much more like what I want to do, helping people and this and that, but I have a mortgage, I have kids, I got to put them through college, I have all of these things. Or even if it's not those kinds of things, even just we don't believe it now because we've done so much of this other kind of work, and our duties and responsibilities in the 10th house for so long have revolved around things that are more materialistic than they are spiritual. Let's say even someone who didn't have a family or who didn't do all of that, but we still see ourselves a certain way in the 10th house because we've had these duties and responsibilities for so long. It's very hard to change and get off that track in the 10th house. So this is often where a person's swadharma, or their individual purpose expressed in the 10th house, is out of alignment and creates stress. So when I see this when I'm doing a reading and I see in someone's chart that they're running the 10th Lord, or let's say they have Saturn going through the 10th house, or they have a lot of pressure in the 10th house, I know this is what they're going to be gauging. This is going to be the calibration. They're going to be like, how much are my values impacting the world? Or how much are my values just making a lot of money? And again, even in a higher sense, this is many people's values. That's as far as they look. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm also not saying that I know it's ultimate for this person. Because what happens when a person just brings all of the value and their values impacting the world, and they bring that whole thing down to a monetary number, and their value as a person and their values and their impact is solely based on how much money they can make, which is a lot of people, I also know it's like a bottomless pit of power. They're just looking to get more and more power, and they're not even asking why. They're just always restless and unsatisfied. And by the way, that restless and ambition and unsatisfaction comes from the 11th house, the lower qualities of it, which I'll talk about in the next video. But what we're really trying to dial in and calibrate is an impact that's congruent with our values. Now, you're wondering why I haven't brought up the 9th house yet, because again, the 9th house is before the 10th house. Well, what winds up happening is often we don't even dial this in until we go through a big 9th house change, right? We're kind of ignorant. We're just kind of going along. Okay, here I am making my money. I mean, I had to provide for my kids. These are my values. So this is, this is all I knew. Then I had this big change, and this terrible, parents died, or this or that, or this intense thing happened in the 8th house. Then I started to learn more about the nature of myself and consciousness and higher principles and teachings, and started learning some of those things in the 9th house. And so I've been changed and transformed so much through these teachings and this higher wisdom, and then I got to go to work and do the same crap I've been doing for 25 years, engineer, sitting in a cubicle, fluorescent lighting, having to deal with things that in my mind now are completely useless. So what happens is when we start to get higher teaching from the 9th house and we start to learn more, we would like those teachings to filter down into our daily work and our daily impact and our daily duties. This is how that 9th house of Dharma, of higher purpose and higher wisdom, translates into the Swadharma. Well, what's my individual expression and impact of that in the 10th house? And again, you want to know that this is why I said the interpretation needs to be extended more, because there are many people who, and I tell people this when they get readings, and they, you know, everybody's not going to be an astrologer or whatever. I mean, it's not like they can't, but they're not. And everyone's not going to be a spiritual teacher or some other kind of thing that someone might imagine after they've gotten, you know, after they've elevated their understanding of life and after they've tried to up-level their work and impact. But it doesn't mean that a person still can't have their main impact be something like seva or service to their guru or their teacher or some other kind of thing. That could still be the driving force, and at which time, when that happens, a person stops defining themselves so much by those lower qualities of the 10th house, like I just said. You know, what I just said about if we don't examine this cycle and this relationship that we have with impact and power, then we're just on a treadmill. We're just on a treadmill and we're just trying to get more, and we're not even sure why. Like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. Or I don't know why I'm successful, but I just don't care. When it's unexamined, this is the pressure and the crisis. What can happen when you introduce 9th house teachings into it, even if the circumstances don't change, the work is seen more in its perspective now. And the person is not defined by it. Their values are much different now. And they even bring a lot of that teaching and wisdom into that job or whatever it is. But their relationship with being defined and having the work be their value system starts to loosen up. And I'll also say this, even for people, one of the things that even like spiritual teachers or counselors or even like someone like me at times has to be careful of, and it can happen, is then once your principles and your vision and all of that is your impact, like you're doing the work, you're in your Svatharma and you're in your flow, it's also then very easy to define yourself by that. And you can't, because I'm not that, you're not that. Even though people might say, oh, it's great that you're doing your life's work, which I am, and it's great, but it doesn't define me. I'm not just this astrologer, like that's my whole life, or this is the only thing I ever do. And a lot of people get stuck in that as well, a lot of teachers especially, and people who are doing their life purpose, then they act like they lose themselves in their actions. Because the 10th house is the karma bhava. It's the house of action and our actions impacting the world. And again, this is why at the end of the day we realize, listen, my actions have impact, and I want that impact to be congruent with who I am and with my highest teaching and highest purpose. So when we're out of alignment, this is the part of us that we feel like we're kind of wasting our life, basically. So things start to get a lot more pressured. Houses 9, 10, and 11, we're getting up to those big things where the soul is trying to expand beyond just other people or ourself, and the questions get bigger, the tests get harder. And even when you start to succeed at a higher level, like when you succeed in these kinds of areas, the test also gets hard, because then it's like, okay, now I've succeeded, now I am my actions, I am this great teacher, I am this, and it's like, well, no, I'm not. This is just what I'm doing, and I'm blessed to do it. I'm blessed that my highest values impacts others and makes them happy, and I'm not going to take myself too seriously like I'm this big whatever, that's also an issue. So that's the 10th house.